July 6, 1943. The Solomon Sea is black and flat, broken only by the slow wake of American cruisers cutting north toward Kula Gulf. There is no moon, no horizon, only darkness and the low vibration of engines carried through steel decks. Inside USS Helena, the glow of radar scopes cuts through the night. Green lines sweep, then pause, contacts appear, faint at first, then undeniable. Enemy ships, closing fast. Orders travel without drama, turrets train. Loaders brace. In seconds, the calm fractures. At 1:57 hours, Helena opens fire. 6-inch guns erupt in a rhythm so fast it sounds mechanical, relentless, shells tearing into the darkness before the enemy even sees her. The sea flashes white with impact. Japanese formations break apart under sudden, precise fire. To those watching from nearby ships, it feels unreal. One cruiser firing like many, this is how USS Helena earns her name. They will call her a machine gun, but speed invites danger. And in these waters, the night always answers back. As shellfire echoes across Kula Gulf, unseen weapons are already running through the water, silent and deadly, closing in on the ship that refuses to stop firing. Behind this moment lies a war that forced steel and men into the dark, and a navy racing to survive a new kind of battle. By the time USS Helena slipped into the Pacific, the balance of naval power had already been shattered. December 7, 1941, had not only destroyed ships at Pearl Harbor, it had exposed a brutal truth. The United States Navy was no longer fighting the wars it had prepared for. Battleships, once symbols of dominance, lay burned and sinking. The Pacific War would be fast, dispersed, and fought across thousands of miles of open ocean. Survival would depend on mobility, firepower, and information, especially at night. Long before the war began, American naval planners had anticipated a decisive confrontation with Japan. War Plan Orange envisioned a slow advance across the Pacific, island by island, culminating in a massive fleet engagement. But theory collapsed under reality. Japan struck first, and suddenly the US Navy was fighting blind, reacting instead of advancing. In this new environment, cruisers mattered more than ever. Light cruisers became the connective tissue of the fleet. They escorted carriers, screened battleships, hunted destroyers, and delivered gunfire where air power could not yet reach. They were expected to fight alone, in groups, and often without daylight. Speed and volume of fire mattered more than armor. USS Helena was a product of that interwar realization, laid down in December 1936 and commissioned in September 1939. Helena belonged to the Brooklyn class of light cruisers, a class designed around one central idea: overwhelming firepower. Her main battery consisted of 15 6-inch guns mounted in 5 triple turrets, more than nearly any cruiser afloat. These guns were not designed for single, decisive blows, but for sustained, rapid fire, destructive salvos delivered again and again. Her designers assumed that if war came, it would be fought in daylight at long range. But the ship carried something that quietly prepared her for a different future: radar. Early in the war, radar was unreliable, misunderstood, and unevenly deployed. But USS Helena would become one of the first American cruisers equipped with advanced SG surface search radar, a system capable of detecting ships in darkness, rain, and smoke. It could see what the human eye could not. More importantly, it could see first. This changed everything. Naval combat had always been about who fired first. At night, that advantage multiplied. Radar did not just locate targets. It allowed commanders to make decisions before the enemy even knew contact had been made. For the first time in history, fleets could fight in total darkness with precision. But technology alone did not guarantee victory. In the early months of the Pacific War, American crews struggled to translate new tools into effective tactics. Radar contacts were often misinterpreted. Fire control systems were still being integrated. Night coordination between ships was poor. And the enemy, the Imperial Japanese Navy, was not unprepared. Japan had spent decades mastering night combat. Its crews trained relentlessly in darkness. Its destroyers carried the Type 93 Along Lance torpedo, fast, long-ranged, and devastating. Japanese doctrine emphasized surprise, aggressive maneuvering, and sudden torpedo attacks before gunfire even began. The stage was being set for a collision of philosophies. USS Helena entered service at a moment when the US Navy was rewriting its own rulebook in real time. She was fast, powerful, and equipped with emerging technology, but she would sail into waters where experience still favoured the enemy. Steel, guns, radar, and doctrine had created her. War would decide whether that creation could survive the night. And soon, Helena would be sent into the most unforgiving proving ground of all, the Solomon Islands. By mid-1942, the war in the Pacific had narrowed into a brutal contest over one chain of islands. The Solomon Islands sat astride the sea lanes between the United States and Australia. Control of them meant control of movement, supply and initiative. For Japan, they were a shield protecting its expanding empire. For the Allies, they were a door that had to be forced open. Guadalcanal became the centre of that struggle. When US Marines landed there in August 1942, they triggered a 6-month campaign that would bleed both navies white. Airfields, jungle ridges, and beaches dominated headlines, but the true battle unfolded offshore, night after night, between surface forces moving at high speed through narrow waters. These were not set-piece engagements, they were ambushes, interceptions, sudden collisions in darkness. American sailors soon gave the waters a name, Iron Bottom Sound, after the wrecks piling onto the seafloor. The Imperial Japanese Navy adapted quickly. Lacking sustained daylight air cover, Japanese commanders turned to night operations to reinforce and resupply their troops. Destroyers and cruisers ran high-speed nighttime supply missions, what the Americans would call the Tokyo Express. They were fast, aggressive, and deadly. To stop them, the US Navy had to meet them at night. This was a war neither side fully understood yet. American doctrine had been built around daylight gunnery and formation discipline, but night fighting demanded decentralization, rapid decision-making, and trust in radar contacts that often contradicted human instinct. Early engagements went badly. Ships fired too late, or not at all. Friendly fire incidents occurred. Torpedoes struck unseen. USS Helena arrived in this environment in 1942, just as the learning curve turned lethal. She joined task force operations across the South Pacific, escorting carriers, screening transports, and supporting operations around Guadalcanal. Her radar operators gained experience night after night, learning how to distinguish land echoes from ships, how to track fast-moving destroyers, how to feed targeting data directly to gun directors. Slowly, the US Navy began to adapt. By late 1942 and early 1943, American cruisers and destroyers were no longer blind in the dark. Radar pickets extended detection ranges. Fire control improved. Commanders began to trust electronic contacts enough to fire before visual confirmation. The USS Helena became one of the clearest expressions of that shift. Her 15 6-inch guns could maintain a rate of fire unmatched by most cruisers in the Pacific. With radar cueing, she could open fire faster than Japanese lookouts could react. In exercises and early engagements, her salvos came so quickly that observers struggled to count them, but improvement brought risk. The very aggressiveness that radar enabled also drew ships closer, faster, deeper into contested waters. American commanders pushed their forces forward, sometimes into confined straits and gulfs where Japanese torpedoes had little room to miss. By mid-1943, Guadalcanal was secured, but the war had not moved on. It had only shifted north. The next Japanese stronghold lay at New Georgia. To isolate it, the US Navy would once again challenge the Tokyo Express in narrow, dark waters. Cruisers and destroyers would intercept Japanese forces attempting to reinforce their garrisons. The USS Helena would be at the centre of those interceptions. She entered the Northern Solomons as a proven fighter, confident in her radar, her guns and her crew. She had survived months of night combat. She had fired more shells than many ships would fire in an entire war. But the Solomon Sea did not reward confidence. It waited, and soon Helena would be tested from every possible angle, human, technological, tactical and mortal, as the battle shifted from preparation to confrontation. USS Helena was not defined by her guns alone. She was defined by the men who lived between them. More than 850 sailors served aboard her at war strength. They slept in cramped compartments, ate in shifts, and worked surrounded by machinery that never truly rested. In the Solomons, heat clung to the ship even at night, sweat mixed with oil. Sleep came in fragments. When radar contacts appeared, fatigue vanished instantly. Gun crews moved by memory and repetition. Shell handlers passed heavy rounds hand to hand in narrow spaces. Loaders worked at a pace that punished muscles and lungs. Every man understood that speed mattered, that slowing down could mean giving the enemy time to strike back. Below decks, damage control teams waited in silence, trained to respond to explosions they could not see. Medics prepared for casualties before the first shot was fired. Radar operators stared at glowing scopes, knowing that a misread contact could doom an entire formation. No one aboard Helena experienced the full battle alone. Each man saw only his station, his task, his moment. Yet together they created something cohesive, a ship that reacted as a single organism in the dark. It was exhausting. It was relentless. And by 1943, many aboard Helena were veterans of months of night fighting. They carried the memory of torpedo hits on sister ships, of fires that burned through steel, of men lost overboard without a sound. They knew the price of a mistake. The defining edge of USS Helena was invisible. A sea surface search radar could detect enemy ships at ranges far beyond visual sight, even in heavy rain or total darkness. Unlike earlier systems, it offered clearer resolution and faster updates. For the first time, American cruisers could track enemy movements in real time. But radar was not magic. It required interpretation, discipline and trust. Early in the war, some commanders hesitated to act on radar alone, fearing false contacts. By 1943, that hesitation was fading. On Helena, radar feeds were tied directly into the ship's fire control system. This allowed gun directors to calculate firing solutions before lookouts could see anything at all. When orders came, turrets were already aligned. This is why Helena fired first so often. Her opening salvos were not guesses. They were measured, deliberate, and devastating. Japanese ships, trained to rely on eyesight and flares, suddenly found themselves under accurate fire without warning. Observers would later say that Helena's guns fired so rapidly they blended into a single continuous roar. Radar had turned information into violence at unprecedented speed. With new capability came new risk. American night fighting doctrine was evolving faster than experience could validate it. Commanders pushed closer to enemy formations, trusting radar to give them the advantage. Engagement ranges shrank. Reaction times shortened. USS Helena was often placed near the front of cruiser columns, where her radar could detect first and strike first. This made her effective, but also exposed. In confined waters like the Solomons, closing distance increased the danger of torpedo attack. Japanese destroyers did not need to see their targets. They launched spreads based on timing, sound, and expectation. Every radar-directed salvo risked revealing position. Every burst of speed narrowed escape options. Yet night after night, Helena's tactics appeared to work. Enemy ships turned away. Transports were driven off. Confidence grew, not recklessly, but steadily. The ship had become an instrument of aggressive doctrine, a symbol of the US Navy's belief that technology could finally dominate the night, but the enemy was adapting too. And beyond the radar screens and gunfire, Japanese commanders were watching, learning, and waiting, preparing to answer speed with silence, and firepower was still running beneath the waves. Commanding a warship in 1943 required more than experience. It required faith in systems that had never existed before the war. USS Helena was commanded by Captain Gilbert C. Hoover, an officer shaped by both pre-war tradition and wartime necessity. He understood the promise of radar, but also its limits. On a dark bridge, surrounded by glowing instruments, leadership meant deciding when to trust machines over human instinct. Radar contacts arrived as numbers and bearings, not silhouettes. They demanded rapid interpretation. Delay meant surrendering initiative. Acting too quickly risked firing into uncertainty. Hoover encouraged decisiveness. Under his command, Helena fired when radar confirmed contact, not when eyes did. He allowed his gunnery officers to exploit the ship's capabilities fully. This made Helena aggressive, sometimes dangerously so, but it also made her effective. Leadership extended below decks. Officers trained crews relentlessly in damage control and gunnery. There was no room for improvisation during combat. Men had to respond automatically because hesitation under fire was fatal. Hoover understood another truth as well. Success spread expectation. Each engagement raised the standard. Each victory pushed the ship deeper into danger next time. The Imperial Japanese Navy did not fear darkness. Long before radar reshaped naval warfare, Japanese crews trained extensively in night operations. Their destroyers and cruisers practiced coordinated maneuvers without lights, guided by experience and instinct. They fired torpedoes in carefully timed spreads designed to intercept unseen enemies. The Type 93 Long Lance torpedo was their greatest equalizer. Fueled by compressed oxygen, it left no visible wake. It travelled farther and faster than any torpedo the Americans possessed. One hit could break a cruiser's spine. Japanese commanders understood that radar gave Americans the first shot. Their answer was not to outrun gunfire, but to outweight it. They closed under fire, launching torpedoes early, often before shells began landing. Then they turned away, leaving steel to finish what they had started. By 1943, Japanese captains had identified radar-equipped cruisers like Helena as priority threats. They studied firing patterns. They noted how aggressively these ships advanced. They adjusted launch timing accordingly. USS Helena's speed of fire impressed her enemies. It also marked her. The men aboard Helena, night combat never became routine. Each engagement carried the same tension. Radar screens might show contacts, but they could not show torpedoes. Sailors knew that destruction often arrived without warning. No sound, no flash, just impact. Sleep deprivation became cumulative. Crews lived in a state of controlled exhaustion, knowing that the next alarm could come at any hour. Fear was managed, not eliminated. Confidence in the ship's abilities coexisted with the awareness of vulnerability. Every man knew that cruisers burned and sank just like any other ship. USS Helena had survived where others had not. But survival did not feel permanent. It felt borrowed. And on the night of July 6, 1943, all of these angles, leadership, technology, enemy adaptation and human endurance, would converge in a single, violent intersection. The radar would see first. The guns would fire fastest, and the sea would decide the rest. Just before 2:00 hours on July 6, 1943, the waters of Kula Gulf were deceptively calm. An American task force, light cruisers USS Helena, Honolulu, and St. Louis, accompanied by destroyers, moved north to intercept a Japanese reinforcement group bound for New Georgia. Intelligence suggested enemy destroyers were approaching under cover of darkness, carrying troops and supplies. USS Helena was near the front of the formation. At 1:56, OSG radar detected multiple contacts, bearings stabilized. Speed estimates confirmed the worst. The enemy was already inside effective gun range. This time, there would be no hesitation. At 1:57, Helena opened fire without visual confirmation. Her forward turrets erupted first, followed by the rest in rapid sequence. 6-inch shells arced into darkness, guided by radar solutions alone. Japanese ships were hit before they could respond with gunfire. Explosions flared along the enemy line. One destroyer began to burn. Helena fired at a pace almost no other cruiser could match. Observers later described her guns as continuous. Shells left the barrels so quickly that individual salvos merged into an unbroken roar. To nearby ships, it seemed as though Helena was emptying her magazines without pause. But Japanese destroyers were not trying to win a gunnery duel. Within moments of first contact, they launched torpedoes, dozens of Type 93s fanning out across the Gulf. These weapons made no sound. They left no visible trail. They ran deep and fast, converging on the American formation. Helena, focused on maintaining fire, continued advancing. Her radar detected ships, but not what was moving beneath the surface. At approximately 2:03, one torpedo struck Helena on the starboard side, forward of the bridge. Seconds later, another hit near the engine rooms. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The ship shuddered violently. Power failed in sections, fire erupted, compartments flooded faster than damage control teams could respond. Still, Helena kept firing. Even as her hull absorbed massive damage, her guns continued to engage targets. For several more minutes she remained in the fight, broken, burning, and still lethal. But the sea had already claimed its advantage. Internal bulkheads buckled. The forward section of the ship began to separate under stress. Flooding spread uncontrollably. The realization spread through the ship not in panic, but in clarity. USS Helena was mortally wounded, yet the battle around her continued. And for the men aboard, the hardest moments were still ahead. not at the guns, but in the water under a dark and indifferent sky. After the torpedo impacts, USS Helena was no longer a single ship. The explosions had torn her open along the starboard side, rupturing engineering spaces and breaking the keel's integrity. Water rushed in with unstoppable force. Fires burned unchecked where power had failed. Internal communications went silent in sections of the ship. Within minutes, the forward hull began to sag. Officers and crew understood the damage instantly. Orders were passed by voice and runner where sound-powered phones no longer worked. Damage control teams fought flooding they knew they could not fully contain. Pumps ran until power failed. Men worked in darkness, knee-deep in rising water, sealing what they could to slow the inevitable. On deck, the list worsened. At approximately 2:15, the forward section of Helena separated violently from the rest of the hull. The ship broke in two. The bow section lifted briefly, then plunged beneath the surface. There was no time for ceremony. The order to abandon ship followed soon after. Life rafts were cut loose. Floats were thrown overboard. Men jumped into the water, some burned, some wounded, many exhausted from hours at battle stations. The sea was crowded with survivors and with danger. Japanese ships still manoeuvred nearby. Secondary explosions echoed across the Gulf. Tracer fire cut through the darkness. Men in the water could not tell whether the flashes meant safety or death. The aft section of Helena remained afloat for several more minutes, her stern settling slowly as water filled open compartments. Then, at approximately 2:30, it too slipped beneath the surface. The USS Helena was gone. What remained were hundreds of men in the water, scattered across miles of open sea. Some clung to rafts, others held on to debris. Many had nothing at all. The night did not end with the sinking. Sharks circled. Fires burned on the surface. Wounded men called out until their voices faded. Discipline held where it could. Sailors grouped together, shared flotation, and took turns keeping watch. Rescue would not come immediately. American destroyers could not linger under threat of further attack. Survivors would drift for hours, some for days, before being recovered. Many would not be found at all. By dawn, the sea revealed its tally. US Helena had fired with unmatched ferocity. She had also paid the price demanded by those waters, and as sunlight spread across Kula Gulf, the battle gave way to reckoning of numbers, consequences, and lessons written in steel and loss. When daylight finally settled over Kula Gulf, it exposed a quiet that felt heavier than the night's violence. Debris drifted across the water, splintered planks, life jackets, oil slicks spreading into thin rainbows under the sun. The battle was over, but its cost remained afloat. USS Helena had gone down with devastating loss. Of the approximately 900 men aboard, 168 were killed in the sinking or lost in the water. Hundreds more were wounded, burned, or exhausted by exposure. Survivors clung to life rafts, wreckage, and each other for hours, some drifting into the open sea before rescue could reach them. American destroyers returned cautiously to recover survivors once the immediate threat passed. The rescue was fragmented and dangerous. Small groups were picked up over several days. Some men survived more than 3 nights adrift, rationing water, shielding the wounded from the sun, and keeping morale alive through shared effort. Not all were found. The Battle of Kula Gulf itself ended ambiguously. The US Navy inflicted damage on Japanese destroyers and disrupted the reinforcement mission, but Japan still managed to land some troops. Tactically, neither side achieved a clean victory. Strategically, however, the cost was uneven. The loss of US Helena struck hard. She was one of the most capable light cruisers in the Pacific, experienced, radar-equipped and crewed by veterans. Her destruction underscored a truth that could no longer be ignored. Radar dominance did not equal invulnerability. Japanese forces lost at least 1 destroyer sunk and others damaged, but their doctrine had once again proven lethal. Torpedoes launched early and without warning had decided the engagement. Reports from the battle were blunt. American commanders acknowledged that aggressive advance under radar guidance had exposed cruisers to concentrated torpedo fire. The assumption that early gunfire could suppress enemy launches was now in question. The sea had answered with finality. Yet among the survivors of Helena, there was no sense of wasted sacrifice. They spoke of discipline under fire, of guns manned until the end, of officers who stayed until evacuation was unavoidable. The ship had done what she was built to do. But as casualty lists were finalised and damage reports circulated, the US Navy faced a harder task. Not mourning the loss, but understanding what it meant for the war still unfolding. The loss of USS Helena did not pause the Pacific War. Operations continued almost immediately. New Georgia would fall. The Solomons campaign would grind northward. But beneath that forward momentum, the US Navy quietly adjusted its thinking. Kula Gulf became a case study. After-action reports from surviving ships were analysed in detail. Radar performance was praised, but tactical employment was questioned. Helena had detected first, fired first, and hit hard, yet she had also advanced into an ideal torpedo envelope without sufficient manoeuvring room. The lesson was not to abandon radar aggression. It was to temper it. Cruiser doctrine shifted toward greater emphasis on evasive action immediately after opening fire. Destroyer screens were pushed further forward to disrupt torpedo launches. Formations were adjusted to reduce predictable approach paths in confined waters. Firepower alone was no longer considered protection. Radar itself continued to improve. Operators were trained to interpret contact movement in relation to likely torpedo tracks. Commanders learned to assume torpedoes were already in the water the moment radar contact was made. USS Helena's experience directly influenced this evolution. Her extraordinary rate of fire had demonstrated the potential of radar-directed gunnery. Her loss demonstrated its limits. Together, those realities shaped the balance American commanders sought between initiative and survival. There was also a human reckoning. Survivors were reassigned to other ships, carrying with them the memory of what had happened in Kula Gulf. Many would fight again under different doctrines, applying hard-earned caution without surrendering resolve. Within months, American surface forces would begin winning night battles more consistently. Improved coordination, air superiority, and refined tactics gradually eroded the effectiveness of Japanese torpedo ambushes, but those improvements were built on loss. USS Helena did not disappear into obscurity. Her name remained in reports, in tactical discussions, and in the memories of officers who had seen firsthand what relentless fire could and could not achieve. She became a reference point, a reminder that technology changes warfare but never removes risk. And as the Pacific War moved forward, the story of Helena began to settle into something quieter than battle, a legacy shaped not by survival but by influence. That legacy now invites reflection. USS Helena was never meant to be immortal. She was designed to fight, to deliver overwhelming fire, to dominate the darkness long enough for others to advance. In that role, she succeeded. Her radar saw first. Her guns spoke faster than almost any cruiser afloat. In the narrow waters of the Solomon Islands, she embodied the US Navy's transition into a new kind of war. But the sea does not reward perfection. The story of Helena is not one of failure. It is a story of limits, of how technology can redefine battle without eliminating its cost. Radar changed night fighting forever, yet it could not see beneath the waves. Firepower could shatter ships, yet it could not stop a weapon already launched. What makes Helena endure is not how she sank, but how she fought. Her crew held their stations under sudden, catastrophic damage. Her guns continued firing after mortal wounds had already been delivered. Her survivors carried discipline and knowledge forward into a navy that would ultimately adapt and prevail. In war, some ships become symbols because they win. Others become symbols because they teach. USS Helena taught a generation of sailors how modern naval combat truly worked. Fast, unforgiving, and shaped by invisible forces as much as visible ones. She forced commanders to balance aggression with caution, speed with survival. Today, her wreck rests beneath the Solomon Sea, silent and unseen, silent and unseen. Above it, the ocean moves on, indifferent as ever.